Chapter 12. In the beginning of chapter 12, we have Naya's story, and she starts off talking about the iron giraffe. Now, I've included a picture of what this would be referring to, and you can see the men, and they have this large metal truck like thing, and it is what the people of Sudan would have referred to as the iron giraffe. It says it's a red giraffe that made very loud noises. And what's taking place in Naya's time here in 2009 is this giraffe is here, and it was a tall drill, and this is on page 70. It's a tall drill that had been brought to the village by the two men who had visited earlier. So remember, those two men were there talking, and they were looking at that land between the two trees, and they were looking at clearing it. And Naya does not understand how they're going to get water from an area where there is no water. She doesn't see the water, therefore the water does not exist for her. It's dry. And if there was water there, why was she always having to go to the pond every morning, make 2 long trips to the pond when there was water there in the village? So, but these two men that had visited and spoke earlier to the people who were in charge of this tribe and this group of people, they returned, these two men, and they returned with 10 more men. So they come with a crew of people, and it says they came with 2 trucks as well. One hauling the giraffe drill along with other mysterious equipment, and the other loaded with plastic pipe. So meanwhile, the land was being cleared. And now Naya's mom, we see her being put to work. She's no longer just keeping house and cooking food. She's doing some work. And she would take the baby and tie the baby on her back and walk with other women. It says that they would walk to a place between the village and the pond. And so she's not going quite as far as Naya. And I would imagine maybe Naya walked with them part way and then they stopped and the women would pick up rocks while Naya maybe continued on to the pond. That's a possibility. But if they went at a different time, then Naya would have started walking. Then obviously she would have walked by herself to the pond. But they would go to this area that was between the village and the pond. So they weren't going as far as Naya, but they would find rocks. And they would take these rocks and stones, and it says in the middle of page 70 that they tied them, the rocks and stones, up into bundles using a sturdy cloth. So they would take this cloth and they would put the rocks and stones in it and tie it really tight, and then they would place these rocks on top of their heads and walk back to the village. They would go to the drilling site where the red giraffe was, and they would put the rocks on the ground there. And there was some people there who would take these rocks that the women were bringing in, and they would take the tools and they would pound the rocks. I'm sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied again. They would pound those rocks into smaller stone and make gravel for the ground. And so they were just putting down a gravel layer around the area. It says many loads of gravel would be needed. Naya didn't know why. The piles of gravel grew larger each day. And then it says at the top of page 71, the clangor of machinery and hammer greeted Naya each time she returned from the pond. Unfamiliar noises that mingled with the voices of men shouting and women singing. It was a sound of people working hard together. But it did not sound at all like water. So Naya's watching this take place. She's observing. She's watching the progress. But again, she's still not seeing water. And this is what she's waiting for, because they say they're going to have water. But she almost, it seems like she doesn't believe that water is actually coming, because she's not seeing water. She's seeing everything else but water. In chapter 12, for Salva's section, we actually have, it says on the slide that this is southern Sudan, but remember he is in Ethiopia. And And I went ahead and put the map that we find at the beginning of the book. If you open up the book to the very first page, the back side, you have a map of Sudan in 1985, and that's what this image is in this slide. And so you can see where Ethiopia is, and you can see where Sudan is. And between the part of the bottom part of Ethiopia and where southern Sudan is, you are going to see a line that says the Gilo River. And so that would be important to this chapter today and what we're looking at in chapter 12. But we have the Itang refugee camp in Ethiopia, and this is where Salva is. He has seen this woman with the orange scarf, and he thinks this is his mother. He's chasing after her, but there's people who are blocking him. But he calls out to her 2 times, but then he stops because he realizes that the lady with the orange scarf is not his mother. And he seems to become despondent again. He's sad. He's realizing the truth is that he probably is never going to see his family again. And so on page 71 in Salva's section, the second paragraph says the woman in the orange headscarf was not his mother. He knew this for certain, even though she was still far away and he had not seen her face. Something inside him tells him this is not his mother, and he comes to terms with it. He comes to understand that he has to accept that his mother is not there at the camp. It says that Uncle's words came back to him. And again, remember, his uncle was there while he was traveling to Ethiopia to this refugee camp, but died at the hands of the other tribe, the newer tribe men, when they shot and killed him. So Salva has come to the camp alone. But he remembers a lot of what Uncle taught him. And in that short time that he was with Uncle, he learned a lot of things about life and about survival and about our theme, which is keep going, don't give up. But it says that Uncle's words came back to him. The village of Lun Arik was attacked, burned, few people survived. No one knows where they are now. So Uncle kind of gives him the idea that even if you were to possibly go looking for them, there's no guarantee that you're going to find them because a lot of people died and then a lot of people fled. So it's going to be difficult to find them if they are still alive. But I think Uncle was preparing him for the reality that they may not be alive and that he just need to come to terms with that. But then it says that at the very last line of that page 71, he says that Salva realized what Uncle had truly meant in what he said, and that was something Salva had known in his heart for a long time, and that's that his family was gone. And so he's sad because he has come to that realization that his family is gone. He's most likely not ever going to see them again. Because they'd either been killed by bullets or bombs, starvation, or sickness. And this is what the top of page 72 says. It did not matter how they died at this point. It's just that they're gone. And that's what he's realizing. But again, at the top of page 72, it says he felt as though he were standing on the edge of a giant hole, a hole filled with all the black despair of nothingness. And again, Salva thinks to himself, I am alone now. I am all that is left of my family. So he goes on to reflect on who his family was, his father, the things that he did for him, and then his mother, how she kept the house and always had food ready for him and was always there caressing him in a motherly way. And then his brothers and sisters, he's thinking of all these people and remembering them. But then he thinks he'll never see them again. And again, he thinks, how can I go on without them? But how can I not go on? They would want me to survive, to grow up and make something of my life, to honor their memories. And so I think one thing, he knows for a fact that Uncle is gone because he saw him get shot and killed. He knows that his friend is gone because there was evidence of a lion snatching him and taking him, and he's not come across him again. So Muriel is gone. But he doesn't know for a fact that his family is gone. But it's important that he comes to the realization that they are most likely gone from the world. And I think this puts him in a position where instead of continuing to search for them, he has to figure out what he's going to do in life to move forward. And so he has to come to that realization that they're gone. I need to move on, kind of thing, which is difficult, especially for an 11-year-old boy. Remember, he's only 11 years old. But it does say at the bottom of page 72, what was it Uncle had said during the first terrible day in the desert? And remember, Uncle asked him if he saw a group of bushes, and he tells him, you need to walk to that group of bushes. Can you make it to that group? And so Salva walked to that group of bushes. And then what did Uncle say after that? Well, he wanted him to walk to the next mark. So do you see those rocks, Salva? Can you walk to those rocks, Salva? And when Salva made it to the rocks, he would give him another landmark to walk to. So he was taking those baby steps. Remember those baby steps he had him taking. So Uncle helped him get through the journey in the desert by giving him those baby steps. And he remembers this. So he gives himself, at 11 years old, he takes the initiative to say, I'm going to give myself baby steps so that I can make it through one day at a time. And that's what he says at the top of page 73. I need only to get through the rest of this day and no other. So he's not going to look at tomorrow yet. He just needs to get through today. And if someone had told Salva that he would live in the camp for 6 years, he would have never believed it. So then we get to the second part of this chapter, and this is 6 years later. This is July of 1991. 6 years later, we find Salva still in the refugee camp of Ethiopia. And so we want to probably look at and consider that he's created a life there. He's going to know the people around him. He's going to have a home at this point in there. And this is what he's known for 6 years. And so this would be a place of comfort for him. This is home, even if it's a refugee camp. So he starts hearing people talking, and it's gossip, but he's hearing word that the camp is going to be closing. And these people, remember, they were pushed out of their home in Sudan, the southern Sudan, and they were sent to or traveled to Ethiopia to get away from the fighting and the war in southern Sudan. So they would have found in this refugee camp, they should have found peace and somewhat quiet. There's a lot of people there, so it probably wasn't very quiet, but they would have found peace and a home. And they've been here for 6 years. So now they're getting word that they might have to leave. And this scares many of them. So people are talking. Salva is listening. And at the bottom of page 73, that last paragraph says that Salva was almost 17 years old now, a young man. He tried to learn what he could about the rumors by talking to the aid workers in the camp. They told him that the Ethiopian government was near collapse. So the Ethiopian government is not doing well. There might be some new leaders that come in and take over Ethiopia. And the leaders that are currently, or were currently the leaders, were working with some mission groups and rescue aids that they were sustaining this refugee camp. Ethiopia itself was not able to do that. There were groups of people who did that, foreign aid groups, it tells us in the book. So now we have this government who is allowing this to happen, this foreign aid to be a part of this refugee camp. If new leadership comes in, would they still allow the same support? And we get on page 74, we get the answer pretty quickly. It says at the top of 74, when that question was answered, no one was ready. And it says, one rainy morning, as Salva walked toward the school tent, long lines of trucks were arriving, and masses of armed soldiers poured out of the trucks and ordered everyone to leave. And I think back to, because in our reading last week, we see these armed soldiers, even though they were part of the newer tribe, they came in and killed his uncle. So I would imagine that seeing a large group of armed soldiers come in would kind of be scary for Salva. Again, another issue for him to deal with. But they ordered everyone to leave, but they were not telling them to leave just the camp. They were telling them to leave Ethiopia. And remember, these people had nowhere to go in southern Sudan. So they came to Ethiopia, and they, for 6 years, have created a life there. And now these soldiers are coming in and telling them to get out, but not just get out of the refugee camp, get out of our country. And so it says immediately there was chaos. People start running around. They're trying to get their stuff. They're probably trying to get their family members together, and they're trying to figure out where they're going. And it says it was as if the people ceased to be people and instead became an enormous herd of panicked, stampeding two legged creatures. Salva was caught up in the surge. His feet barely touched the ground as he was swept along by the crowd of thousands of people running and screaming. So there's a lot of chaos as these people are leaving Ethiopia. It then says that the soldiers fired their guns into the air and chased the people away from the camp. But once they were beyond the area surrounding the camp, the soldiers continued to drive them onward, shouting and shooting. So they get the people out of the camp, but the soldiers don't stop. And what Salva realizes is that the soldiers are, well, he hears people talking, and this is why he realizes it. But the soldiers are driving them towards the river. And this river is the Gilo River. And it runs along the border of southern Sudan and Ethiopia. And at the top of page 75, Salva says they are driving us back to Sudan. They will force us to cross the river. And it leaves us with another cliffhanger, another suspenseful moment because it's rainy season, so the river is going to be high and it's going to be deep because there's a lot of water there. But not only that, there's crocodiles. And so we've seen Silva deal with starvation, dehydration from lack of water. He has suffered from lack of sleep, severe mosquito bites, lion killings, and his uncle being killed. But now he's got the fear of facing possibly crocodiles in the Gilo River. Chapter 13. Okay, so in chapter 13, again, we have Naya's section, Southern Sudan, and this is 2009 now. And I like how it starts out because Naya is kind of maybe laughing at the situation. It says, Naya thought it was funny. You had to have water to find water. Water had to be flowing constantly into the borehole to keep the drill running smoothly. So she's seeing what's going on, and there's just issue after issue. We see a lot of trial and error with the drilling that's taking place in the area where Naya is in her village. And it just says that the crew drove to the pond and back several times a day. The pond water was piped into what looked like a giant plastic bag, and a bag big enough to fill the entire bed of the truck. So they take this pond water and they fill this huge bag with water from the pond. But the bag gets a leak, and so the leak had to be patched. And then the patch gets a leak, and the crew patched the patch. And so Naya's seeing some of these things, and she thinks it's kind of funny. I think she still believes or does not believe that water is going to be available to them in their village. But you have these people, And the drilling cannot take place without the water. So when these bags that they're getting of water from the pond are getting leaks and they're not able to get the water to the drill, this is going to put a delay in drilling. They cannot drill without the water from the pond. And so the men who are there working get discouraged. And remember, there's 10 of them there with the 2 men that came originally. And Naya can tell who's the boss of this group of men because he tries to have a good relationship with them. I think he jokes around with them. But when they get discouraged and he's being kind to them, then it says that he would talk to them earnestly and try to persuade them. And I imagine a little bit like a coach would try to persuade a team, maybe a football team, who needs some encouragement. Maybe they're losing, and so he's going to go in and be like, you guys can do this, and we're going to get it done. And so I would imagine that's how he is talking to the men when the joking and laughing doesn't work. And then if that doesn't work, the coach talk doesn't work very well in motivating these men in the drilling, it says that he would get angry. And it said he did not get angry often, but he would get angry sometimes. But I also like that it says that the boss kept working. And a lot of times in leadership, you need to see that the person in charge is also doing the work. It's not just that they're telling others to do it, he's out there working with them. So the men would come together, they would patch that bag again so that they could get water from the pond to the drill, and the drilling could continue. So, Sean, I don't know how Salva continued to go for so long in the situations that he has been through. And in the last chapter, I talked a little bit about that and just all the events that have taken place and how he has survived. And in chapter 13, we see a little bit of how he feels and how he survives this. And he's almost in disbelief as well. But we have these soldiers, remember, they're running the people out of the refugee camp and out of Ethiopia. They're at this river, and they are, one of the things that Salva is very worried about are the crocodiles and the high river. So the Gila River is very full. The current is going to be really strong. And we see that at the beginning of chapter 13 in Salva's section, because he sees this sky that says, first of all, hundreds of people are lining the bank. So you have all these people, and I would think that some of them don't want to be the first person into the water. And some people might wait back because they want to see what happens when someone does go into the water. But the soldiers are there, they're shooting their guns in the air, and they're forcing the people to go into the water, either by hitting them with the back of the gun or by shooting bullets into the air and scaring them into the water. So it says other people, afraid of the soldiers and their guns, were leaping into the water on their own. They didn't even have to be like pushed in by those soldiers, and they were immediately swept downstream by the powerful current. So they weren't strong enough to fight the current. But Salva notices one guy, and this guy gets in the water, and he's being carried downstream pretty quickly, but he's also moving towards the other side. So while he's going downstream, he's still getting across the river somehow, and he's making progress, and so this looks good. But what we see at the bottom of 77 is that Salva sees next, he sees a crocodile's tail. And so this is bad news. And Salva watches as the crocodile approaches the man. And at the bottom of page 77, it says, Then Salva saw the telltale flick of a crocodile's tail as it flopped into the water near the young man. Moments later, the man's head jerked oddly once, twice. His mouth was open. Perhaps he was screaming. But Salva could not hear him over the din of the crowd and the rain. So it's raining even on these people, and they're having to cross this river. And there's so many people, he doesn't hear this man if he is screaming. And it says a moment later, the man was pulled under. A cloud of red stained the water. So the crocodile has attacked and by all means, like, eaten this man or a portion, whatever. The man is dead. He did not survive. So while it looked good, he was making progress, didn't turn out good for him. So it continues on that the rain was still pouring down, and now bullets were pouring down as well. So the soldiers are no longer shooting in the air, they're going to be shooting towards the people. And as these people are trying to cross the river, the soldiers are shooting into the river and killing the people who are leaving Ethiopia. And Salva does not understand why. I don't really understand why either. I've kind of thought maybe just because they don't care about the people, maybe they feel like they're helping the people by killing them. I don't know. But the soldiers are now killing the people in the water. It says Salva had no choice. He's going to get shot. So, what do? He's got to try to at least cross the river. He may drown, he may get shot, or he may be killed by a crocodile. But he has to take the chance. He does not have a choice. There's no other options for him. So he jumps into the water and he begins to swim. It says a boy next to him grabbed him around the neck and clung to him tightly. So this guy is probably trying to save himself by holding on to Salva. Maybe Salva looks like he can swim, and maybe this boy can't swim. I don't know. But the boy grabs a hold of them. This causes a problem for Salva because now he can't stay above the water. This guy's weight and him holding on to him is pushing him down into the water. And it says Salva was forced under the surface without time to take more than a quick, shallow breath. So he's not even able to get a big, deep breath of air so he can swim under the water. So he's struggling with this guy on his neck, and he's trying to get through, and he doesn't know how to get him off of him. But it says suddenly the boy's grip loosened, and Salva launched himself upward. So he comes up to the top of the water. He's able to get a big gasp of air, but he's choking on the water that he's taken in. And so it says that he looks, though, when he's able to see, and he realizes that the boy only let go of his neck and stopped from pushing him under because he was dead. He was killed, a bullet hole in the back of his neck, it says. So the boy was trying to save himself at the cost of Salva's life, but ended up dead anyway from a gunshot wound from the soldiers. So Salva realizes that even though this boy was causing him to drown or could have had him die from the drowning, that it was a blessing in disguise because Salva actually survived and was not shot to death with the guns. But it says there's no time, the top of page 79, there's no time to even think like, wow, this is great. I survived because of this guy who is now dead. Because more crocodiles are launching themselves into the banks, off the banks, I'm sorry, and into the river. And so with the current and the bullets, then the crocodiles, there's a lot going against Salva. And it says the welter of arms and legs, the screams, the blood. Salva just knows he has to get across. And at this point, you would not be thinking about other people. Survival mode is to save yourself at a time like this. And so he's trying to get across and get to safety without being shot, without being pulled under by somebody else trying to stay afloat and using him as a floating device, and without getting eaten by the crocodile or swept downriver. So this does not look good for Salva. It says he doesn't know how long he was in the water. It felt like a really long time. But he gets to the other side. And he's kind of amazed at this because, again, how out of all of these people is he one that survives? He does not know why. But it says in the middle of page 79, later he would learn that at least 1,000 people had died trying to cross the river that day. They were drowned or shot or attacked by crocodiles. So at least 1,000 people. Maybe there was 1,000, maybe there was 1,001, but it says at least 1,000 people died trying to cross the river that day. And he says, well, how was it that he was not one of the 1,000 that died? Why was he one of the lucky ones? Why was he spared? And so we have this idea or this questioning, and then we get into the next section because now that Salva has survived crossing the river. He's back in southern Sudan. What now? Well, he decides there's still fighting going on in southern Sudan. He probably should not stay there or else he could possibly lose his life. So the next best thing would be Kenya. And Kenya is another country he's got to travel to. If you look back at the beginning of the book, you've got the southern Sudan area, and then he can get into Kenya. So he's got to walk down through southern Sudan away, and then he's going to go into Kenya. So he's got another journey. We find out by the end of chapter 13 that this takes a year and a half. And what happens during this year and a half, even when they first start traveling, Salva becomes the leader of this group of people. And remember, he learned from his uncle who led the first group that Salva was in coming into Ethiopia. And it's a little bit ironic that now he's the leader leading the people out of Ethiopia and into Kenya from southern Sudan. So at the bottom of page 79, we see his thoughts. The italicized part words are his thoughts. And he says, well, first of all, it says, they need to walk, but they don't know where. And it says that he's just not sure which way to go. So he can't go home. There is still war everywhere in Sudan. They can't go back to Ethiopia. The soldiers are going to shoot them. And then Kenya. There was supposed to be refugee camps in Kenya. So that looks like the most ideal place. So he decides this is where I'm going to go. And he gets these boys these group of people just happen to follow him and go with him. And it says that crowds of other boys followed him. Nobody talked about it, but by the end of the first day, Salva had become the leader of a group of about 1,500 boys. Some were as young as 5 years old. And remember, Salva was 11 when he was traveling over to Ethiopia from southern Sudan. And the people in his group thought he was too young to make the journey. So they really didn't care about him and take care of him until his uncle showed up. And so here's Salva. And I don't think anybody said, hey, why don't you be our leader? I think just through his actions that people just looked at him and followed him. But he does get to a leadership role where he's having to act the leader as well. But he does think the smallest boys, those 5-year-old boys, remind him of his brother. And so his little brother. And so he thinks of them and he remembers his family. And he thinks about his brother and sisters, but he thinks of them as the little kids they were when he left. And he realizes they're not so little anymore. But it says in the middle of page 80, they were traveling through a part of Sudan still plagued by war. The fighting and bombing were worse during the day. So Salva makes the decision that they should hide during the day and do their walking at night. But the problem with this is they're not really sure which direction they're going. And so they realize over time that sometimes they were walking in a circle. So this is going to make their journey even longer because they're walking where they've already walked. And so that's something Salva has to figure out, especially as the leader of the group. He's got to figure that out. The top of page 81 says, when Salva heard the stories, go back to page 80. Let's talk about that. Every group had stories of terrible peril. It says boys who had been hurt or killed by bullets or bombs, attacked by wild animals, or left behind because they were too weak or sick to keep up. So these stories he hears from other people who were traveling in groups as well. It makes him think of Mariel, his friend who was killed by the lions. And it says he felt his determination growing as it had in the days after Uncle's death. So he thinks, I will get us safely to Kenya, no matter how hard it is. So now he's not only just been chosen as the the leader, he's now taking that role. So he gives everybody jobs to do and he tries to encourage them. And it says there were times when some of the boys did not want to do their share of the work. Maybe they were tired, maybe they were hurting, maybe they just wanted to give up. But Salva would talk to them, encourage them, coax and persuade them. Once in a while, he had to speak sternly or even shout, but he tried not to do this often. It was as if Salva's family were helping him even though they were not there, and they helped him by him remembering them and the strong qualities that they had. So he remembered how he had looked after his little brother, Cool, but he also knew that what it felt like to have to listen to the older ones, Eric and Ring, and he could recall the gentleness of his sisters and the strength of his father and the care of his mother. And I think all those things he tried to give to the boys that were in his group. He tried to take a little bit of something from each of his family members to be a good leader. Most of all, he remembered how Uncle had encouraged him in the desert, is that last sentence on page 81. And so that's a good way for him to lead these boys. Just one more day, if they could just take it day by day, they would probably get there over time. So one step at a time, one day at a time, just today, just this day to get through. And if he focused on just the day, then it didn't seem so hard a task. So Salva told himself this every day. He told the boys in the group today. And one day at a time, the group made its way to Kenya. More than 1,200 boys arrived safely. So the majority of his group made it. It took them a year and a half. So here he had 6 years where he was in that refugee camp and they get kicked out and they get pushed back into southern Sudan. And he takes these boys into Kenya and it takes them a year and a half to get there. But they do make it there and they arrive at the Kenyan refugee camp. And we'll see what happens in the next chapter.